You're at a dinner. Maybe it's a work event. Maybe it's a friend's birthday. Something like that. And someone walks up to you. You know this person. You've met them before, maybe more than once. You can picture the last time you spoke. You remember the restaurant. You remember they were wearing a blue jacket. You remember they laughed too loudly at something that wasn't that funny. All of that is right there. But their name, gone. Just nothing. And you do what everybody does. You smile, you nod, you say, "Oh, hey, good to see you." And in the back of your mind, you're scrambling, you're panicking a little, and eventually you lean over to whoever you came with and whisper, "What was their name again?" And later on the drive home, you tell yourself, "I'm just terrible with names. I've always been terrible with names. And I want to stop you right there. Because that story you just told yourself, it's a lie, a very comfortable, very socially acceptable lie, but a lie nonetheless. I've spent over 40 years studying the work of Carl Jung, his clinical writings, his personal journals, his lectures, his letters. And one of the things that struck me early on, something I keep coming back to decade after decade, is how precisely Jung understood the mechanism behind what we casually dismiss as forgetting. He would tell you, and he did tell his patients in exactly these terms, that your memory is not broken, it is not weak, it is not unreliable. In fact, your memory is working with stunning precision, so precisely, so efficiently, so protectively, that it hid that name from you on purpose. You didn't forget their name. Something inside you, something with its own intelligence, its own logic, its own survival instinct, rejected them. And what I want to do today, if you'll let me, is show you why. Because once you understand the real reason names disappear, you'll never look at your own mind the same way again. More importantly, you'll never look at yourself the same way. So let's start with the thing everybody says, but nobody examines. I'm bad with names. People say this the way they'd say I'm not a morning person or I can't do math, as if it's hardwired, as if it's just the way their brain works. But here's what I want you to notice. You don't forget every name. Think about it honestly. You remember the name of the person who made your heart beat a little faster. You remember the name of the person who could open doors for you professionally. You remember the name of the one who told you that story that made you laugh so hard you spilled your drink. Those names stuck. No effort required. They just landed. So your memory isn't broken. It's selective. And the question nobody asks, the question Jung would insist you ask, is, what are the selection criteria? Because they're not random. They are deeply, uncomfortably psychological. Now, Jung didn't arrive at this through philosophy. He arrived at it through experiment. And this is what makes his contribution so remarkable. He proved it. Early in his career, at the Burghölzli Psychiatric Clinic in Zurich, Jung developed something called the word association test. Very simple setup. He'd sit across from a patient and read them a list of 100 words. Just ordinary words. Water, father, knife, house. And the patient's job was to say the first word that came to mind. That's it. Just react. And Jung would sit there with a stopwatch. Now, most people, when they hear about this experiment, they think Jung was interested in the answers. What did the person say in response? But that's not what he was watching. He was watching for something else entirely. He was watching for the hesitations, the stammers, the long pauses, the moments where someone's face changed just slightly, or their breathing shifted, or they gave an answer that made absolutely no sense in context. Because those moments, those little breakdowns in the smooth flow of response, were the giveaway. And those were the places where something hidden had been touched. And then Jung did something brilliant. After the test was finished, he'd go back through the same list of words and ask the person to recall their original responses. And here's where it gets truly interesting. For most of the words, people remembered just fine. But for specific words, always the same ones, memory failed. Completely. And those specific words were, without exception, the ones that had struck what Jung called a feeling-toned complex, an emotional nerve buried below conscious awareness. Now, he noted something about this that I find extraordinary, and I want to make sure you hear it, because it's counterintuitive. We all know that emotional events are usually better remembered. Your wedding day, the birth of your child, the accident you were in when you were 17. Emotion tends to burn things into memory. Jung knew this. And yet his experiments showed the exact opposite, happening with these particular words. He wrote, and I'm going to give you his exact language here, "It is known that emotionally accentuated things are better retained in memory than indifferent things. This is quite true, but it doesn't hold for the linguistic expression of an emotionally accentuated content. On the contrary, one very easily forgets what one has said under emotion." Let me say that again, because it's easy to miss how radical this is. The emotional charge doesn't help you remember. It prevents you from remembering. Not because the emotion is weak, but because it's too strong, too threatening, too close to something your conscious mind has decided it cannot face. And so the memory gets pulled under, not lost, pulled under. And this is where we get to the mechanism behind forgetting a name, because a name, you see, is not just a label. A name is a recognition. When you say someone's name, you are saying, "I see you. You exist. I acknowledge your presence in my world." And when your psyche can't do that, when something about this person threatens your image of yourself, then the first thing that gets confiscated is the name. Not the face, not the context, not the memory of meeting them, the name. Because the name is the acknowledgement, and it's the acknowledgement your psyche is refusing to make. So, what is this thing, this complex, that has the power to reach into your conscious mind and simply delete a piece of information? Let me show you what Jung actually observed, because it's more unsettling than most people realize. Jung described a feeling-toned complex as a cluster of emotions, memories, images, and associations that gather around a central theme. It could be a theme of inferiority, or abandonment, or envy, or shame, anything that carries a strong emotional charge. And the critical thing he discovered is that these complexes don't sit there passively, waiting for you to examine them. They act independently, on their own authority. Jung said it plainly. Complexes behave like independent beings. And in another place, he put it even more starkly. What is not so well known, but far more important theoretically, is that complexes can have us. I want you to sit with that for a moment. We don't just have complexes, they have us. They operate like small personalities inside your personality, each one with its own fears, its own goals, its own strategies. And one of their most effective strategies is erasure. If someone walks into your life and activates one of these complexes, if they touch the nerve of your inferiority, or your envy, or your unresolved grief, the complex doesn't just make you uncomfortable, it makes the source of the discomfort disappear from your conscious awareness. Starting with the name. Let me make this real for you. 3 examples, and I want you to be honest with yourself about which one you recognize. First one, you're at some professional gathering and you meet someone who does roughly what you do. Same field, similar background, except they're further along, more accomplished, more confident, People are drawn to them. You have a perfectly pleasant conversation, 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, and 2 weeks later, somebody mentions that person, and you draw a complete blank. Can't place the name at all. You met them, you spoke with them, but the name is gone. And the reason is that this person activated what Jung would call your inferiority complex. Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because they represented something you want and haven't yet achieved. And your psyche, in its misguided attempt to protect your self-image, erased the evidence that this person exists. Because if you remembered them clearly, you'd have to feel the gap, and the gap hurts. Second one, your partner introduces you to an old friend, and this friend is warm, charming, easy to be around. Maybe they're attractive, and something in you tightens. It's subtle. You might not even register it consciously. But a week later, you cannot for the life of you remember if their name was Sarah or Sandra or something else entirely. That's a jealousy complex, an emotional constellation powerful enough to reach into your memory and redact a name like a government censor blacking out a classified document. You don't experience it as jealousy. You experience it as forgetfulness. That's the trick. Third one, and this one goes deeper. You meet someone, and there's something about them that you can't quite identify. They don't look like anyone you know. They don't sound like anyone familiar. But something, a gesture, a tone of voice, a particular quality of attention or inattention, lands in a place that's very old, somewhere in your body, somewhere that remembers your mother or your father, or whoever it was who shaped your earliest understanding of love and disappointment, and by the next morning you can't retrieve their name, because what you encountered wasn't really a stranger. It was a ghost, an echo of a relational pattern that was laid down before you had words for it. The complex that got activated doesn't even belong to your adult life. It belongs to the child you were, and that child's protective mechanisms are still running, still deleting anything that comes too close. Now, in all three of these cases, the person would tell you the same thing. I'm just bad with names. And they'd believe it. Completely. That's the remarkable efficiency of the complex. It doesn't just hide the content. It hides the fact that anything was hidden. It covers its own tracks. Jung described a complex as something that is incompatible with the habitual attitude of consciousness, meaning what this person represents cannot be absorbed into the story you tell yourself about who you are. And so, the complex doesn't just suppress the feeling, it suppresses the person. It starts with the name, because the name is where recognition lives. Jung had a specific term for this kind of targeted forgetting, and it's important that you hear it, because it changes the entire frame. He called it systematic amnesia, not random, not scattered, systematic. He wrote, "Repression causes what is called a systematic amnesia, where only specific memories or groups of ideas are withdrawn from recollection. In such cases, a certain attitude or tendency can be detected on the part of the conscious mind, a deliberate intention to avoid even the bare possibility of recollection, for the very good reason that it would be painful or disagreeable." I want to draw your attention to one phrase in there. A deliberate intention to avoid even the bare possibility of recollection. That is not a description of bad memory. That is a description of an active defense. Your conscious mind assessed the threat, determined that remembering would be painful, and sealed the file. Not lost it, sealed it. There's a difference between losing your keys and locking them in a safe, and your psyche is locking them in a safe. And here's what most people miss. What I find really opens people's eyes once they see it. This doesn't stop at names. Once you understand the mechanism, you start seeing it everywhere in your life. Think about the book someone recommended to you 6 months ago that you keep meaning to read but never quite get around to. Ask yourself, what's it about? What might it stir in you? Think about the email that's been sitting in your inbox for 3 weeks, the one you've seen, you've registered, but somehow you keep scrolling past. Who sent it? What might it say? The conversation you told someone you'd continue, but you never called back. The invitation that you genuinely meant to respond to, but the date came and went. None of this is laziness. None of it is carelessness. In each case, something inside you is running an operation, a sophisticated, efficient, invisible operation to keep specific things outside the reach of your conscious awareness. Because if you remembered, if you truly are fully remembered, you would have to feel something you're not ready to feel. You would have to confront something you're not ready to confront. And the unconscious, whatever else it is patient. It will wait. It will keep that file sealed for as long as you need it to. But it will also keep sending you signals that the file exists. Jung described the personal unconscious as a repository for all of this sealed material. He said it contains everything of which I was once conscious, but have now forgotten. All more or less intentional repressions of painful thought and feelings. And I always tell people, the personal unconscious is not a junk drawer. It is not a place where things go to be lost. It's a filing system, a highly organized, emotionally curated archive. And the organizing principle is simple. If this threatens the ego's image of itself, file it where consciousness can't reach. The name of the person who made you feel small, filed. The name of the person who made you feel envious, filed. The name of the person who stirred something you don't have a category for, filed. All under the same heading, inaccessible until further notice. Now, if you've stayed with me this far, I think it's because something in what I'm describing has touched something real in your experience. Maybe you're thinking of a specific person right now, someone whose name has slipped away from you more than once, and for the first time, you're starting to wonder if the forgetting wasn't accidental. That recognition, that moment of, oh, wait, that is the beginning of the real work. That's the beginning of what Jung would call consciousness. And this channel, what we try to do here, is exactly this kind of work. We go into Jung's writings, the real material, not the watered-down motivational versions you see everywhere, and we pull out the things that actually explain how human beings function beneath the surface. If that's what you've been looking for, if you're tired of the shallow version, I'd invite you to subscribe. Not because of any algorithm, but because the deeper we go together, the more useful this becomes. And I promise you, we are going to go very deep. So let me take you into the next layer, because this is where it starts to get genuinely transformative. Everything I've described so far, the complex, the systematic amnesia, the protective forgetting, all of that is mechanism. And it explains how names disappear. But there's a question underneath the mechanism, and it's the question that really matters. Why that person? Of all the people you've met, why did your psyche target that specific name for deletion? And the answer takes us into the territory that Jung devoted most of his life to exploring, the territory of the shadow. The shadow, in Jung's framework, is the part of yourself that you have rejected, not the part that doesn't exist in you. That's the crucial distinction. The shadow is made up of qualities, impulses, desires, and capacities that are real, that are yours, but that your conscious identity has decided it cannot own. You've built a self-image, we all have. And whatever doesn't fit that image gets pushed below the surface. If you see yourself as generous, your selfishness goes into the shadow. If you see yourself as easygoing, your rage goes into the shadow. If you see yourself as modest, your ambition, the raw, hungry, unapologetic ambition that actually drives you, that goes into the shadow. Now here's the connection to forgetting names, and it's one that I think changes everything once you see it. When you meet someone who embodies a quality that lives in your shadow, someone who is openly ambitious when you've suppressed your own ambition, someone who is freely expressive when you've learned to hold yourself back, someone who is comfortable with power when you've made yourself small, your psyche encounters a problem, because that person is a mirror, and it's a mirror showing you something that belongs to you, something that is a real capacity of yours, but something that your ego has declared inadmissible. You can't look at it. You've built your entire identity around not looking at it. And so what happens? You turn away. Not physically. You're perfectly polite. You smile, you chat, you shake their hand. But psychologically, you turn away. And the mechanism of that turning away is the deletion of the name. Because the name is how recognition works. The name says, I see you, and I acknowledge what you are. And your shadow, your complex, your ego's defense, whatever you want to call it, refuses to make that acknowledgement. Because acknowledging them would mean acknowledging the thing in yourself that they represent. And you're not ready. Jung put it with his usual precision. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But I would extend that beyond irritation, because it's not only the people who annoy us, it's also the people who awe us, the people who intimidate us, the people who make us feel suddenly small, or suddenly envious, or suddenly restless in a way we can't explain. Those responses are not about them. Those responses are signals from the shadow. And the people whose names you forget are often, not always, but often, the people who carry something that belongs to you, something you have not yet claimed. Their confidence, that's your unclaimed confidence. Their freedom, that's your unlived freedom. Their ease with themselves, that's the self-acceptance you haven't yet achieved. You saw it in them. You recognized it. Some part of you registered it instantly, because it is yours in potential. And then the complex did what complexes do. It buried the evidence, starting, as always, with the name. Which means, and this is what I really want you to take with you, every name you've forgotten is not a failure. It's a signal, a breadcrumb, a piece of evidence left behind by your own unconscious, pointing directly at the parts of yourself you haven't integrated yet. Jung called the central project of human psychological life individuation, the process of becoming whole by making the unconscious conscious. And one of the most accessible doorways into that process, one that's available to you every single day, is right here. In the names you can't remember. Those names are not lost. They are hidden. And they are hidden for a reason. And the reason always leads back to you. So what do you do with this? Because understanding a mechanism is one thing. Working with it is another. And I want to give you something practical, something you can actually use, because that's what matters. The next time you forget someone's name, I want you to try something. Don't apologize. Don't dismiss it. Don't make the joke about being bad with names. Instead, pause, just for a few seconds, and ask yourself one question. What did this person make me feel? Not what you thought about them. Not whether you liked them or didn't like them. What you felt. Was there a tightening in your chest? A warmth you didn't expect? a subtle bristling, like something in you was defending itself, a flash of comparison, them against you, a sense of being diminished or outshone or unsettled in some way you couldn't articulate. That feeling, whatever it is the thread. Pull on it, because the feeling and the name are stored in the same place. They're part of the same complex. And this is directly from Jung's own clinical method. He never pushed for missing content directly. He followed the emotion. He understood that the memory and the affect are bound together, and if you approach through the feeling, you bypass the block that the ego has set up against the content. You go in through the side door instead of trying to break down the front. So don't chase the name, chase the affect, the discomfort, the admiration, the threat, whatever it was, name that. Name the feeling. And you'll find that the name of the person often surfaces on its own, because you've done something important. You've told your unconscious that you're ready. You're ready to see what it's been protecting you from. And once that signal is received, the repression relaxes. Not always instantly, but it relaxes. Because the repression was never about the name. It was about the feeling. And once you've faced the feeling, the name has no reason to stay hidden. But the deeper practice, the one that actually changes your life over time, not just your memory, is the practice of integration. Every time you track a forgotten name back to its emotional source, you are doing what Jung called shadow work. You are recovering a piece of yourself. That envy you felt toward the person whose name vanished. That's your unlived ambition, showing you what it looks like when someone actually acts on it. That intimidation you felt, that's your unclaimed power, showing you the size of what you're sitting on. That strange discomfort you couldn't name. That's the boundary of your current self-image. And just beyond it is the version of you that's trying to emerge. Jung wrote that repression is not only a factor in the etiology of many neuroses, it also determines contents of the personal shadow, which means that every name you forget adds another layer to the wall between you and your wholeness. And every name you recover, consciously, honestly, by following the feeling back to its source, removes one. I want to leave you with one more thing. We've been talking about the names of other people, the names your psyche has hidden from you. But there's one name that this whole mechanism touches more deeply than any other, and it's your own. Not the name on your birth certificate. I mean the full name of who you are, the complete version, the one that includes everything you've accepted about yourself and everything you've pushed away, the generous parts and the selfish parts, the brave parts and the terrified parts, the light and the shadow held together. Jung believed that every person carries within them what he called the self, capital S, a totality that is far larger and more complete than the small, curated identity we walk around with every day. And the process of becoming that self, the process of individuation, requires exactly the opposite of what we've been doing our whole lives. It requires us to stop forgetting, to stop erasing, to stop performing the systematic amnesia that keeps us comfortable but incomplete. Every forgotten name is an invitation, not a failure, not an embarrassment, an invitation. Your unconscious is saying, here, look here. This is where the next piece of you is waiting. So the next time you blank on someone's name at a party or an event or in the hallway at work, don't apologize. Smile. Not because it's funny, but because you've just been handed a gift, a signal from your own depths, a message from the part of you that is still waiting to be known. Don't ask, what was their name? Ask, what did they make me feel? And follow that thread, because it leads somewhere. It always leads somewhere. And where it leads is toward the person you are still becoming. Jung said it better than anyone. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. He was right. And the name you forgot last week? That's fate, trying to wake you up. Let it.